Hey everybody, welcome to today's session. We have our TEN Life Science Syndicate, and we're really excited to have everybody join us today. My name is Shane. I run the events over at TEN Capital Network, and we have some great content for you as well as some great pitches from some great companies. So with that, I'm going to bring our moderator up as well as our first speaker. And just to remind everybody in the audience, if you do have any questions, you can go ahead and put those in our chat box throughout the session. We can get to them when we can. And also don't forget to answer the polls at the end of each pitch. So with that, I'll hand it over to Hall to get things started.
Great. Thanks, Shane. I want to thank everybody for joining us today for another great presentation. Today we have with us several activities. The first is going to be D.A. Wallach. He's going to talk about healthcare biotech investing on moonshot basis. And then we're going to have 4 of our companies presenting. After that, we're going to have breakout sessions in which you can meet each of these presenters in a breakout room. I'll be hosting a room myself on how TEN Capital works. So for those in the room that want to learn more about our program, I'd be glad to talk with you then. But with that, let's go back and let's talk to our presenter today, D.A. Wallach. D.A., thank you for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Hall.
Great. Well, I'd like you to tell a little bit more about yourself to the audience, and then when you're ready, go ahead and kick off with your presentation.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, Hall and Shane, thanks for having me. And I wish I could see all of you, but I trust you're there. I see we've got some good attendance today. And I'm dialing in from Los Angeles, where I have lived for the past 15 or so years. I'll give you a little bit on my background and then share some information on the firm that I started a couple of years ago and the way we think about investing in healthcare and biotech. I'm a bit of an odd duck in this industry in that I never started in medicine or investing originally. I began my career 15 years ago when I graduated from college as a rock musician. And the genesis of that was that I started a rock band my freshman year of college. This is in 2003. And just before we graduated in 2007, was very lucky to meet Kanye West. And Kanye discovered our group and offered us a large record deal. And so I moved out to LA as a 21-year-old in 2007, fully expecting that I would be a rock musician for the rest of my career. That did not happen, of course, or I wouldn't be here today, but I spent about 5 years full-time making records and touring and had some amazing experiences, as you can imagine, doing that. I toured with Lady Gaga, Weezer, Blink-182, Pharrell, and a lot of our favorite artists. And never expected to be in the investment business. But about 11 years ago, had a very fateful meeting with the founders of Spotify. And from where I stood as a musician, it became clear to me that they had a real shot at dramatically transforming the way the record business worked and the way that music was distributed and consumed. And I felt as a musician that this had the potential to sort of change everything, as it were. And so I convinced them to let me make an investment in the company. That was the first venture capital activity I was ever involved in, and obviously was a very lucky place to start. And I became instantly addicted to early stage venture capital. So shortly after Spotify, I cast a wider net, started flying up to San Francisco and meeting other technology companies across a range of industries, and made some investments in companies that went on to do really big things over the past decade. Some of those include SpaceX, which I invested in about 10 years ago, before they launched the first reusable rocket. A company called Ripple that's become a major player in the cryptocurrency world, Box.com, which is a great now public cloud software business, and a series of others. And what I found was that it was so rewarding to become a part of these businesses early in their trajectory when they were still doing something that was a little bit heterodox, and then to watch them take over the world as they progressively convinced customers that what they were doing had value. About 8 years ago, I made my first healthcare investment, which was in the seed round of a company called Doctor on Demand. That is now a part of a larger company called Included Health, after it merged ultimately with a business called Grand Rounds. And I was struck by the fact that among healthcare folks, the idea of a telemedicine app on everyone's phone was seen as sort of revolutionary. This is, again, about 8 years ago, obviously before COVID. And it was alarming to me that in the healthcare sector, something as simple as basically FaceTime for doctors was viewed as so radical and disruptive. And so that got my curiosity piqued, and I started spending more and more time learning about the healthcare sector, immersing myself in it. And initially, my focus was on businesses that I thought had disruptive potential in healthcare delivery. So I was spending a lot of time talking to folks at hospitals and insurance companies and in the pharmacy supply chain about what digital technology might do to change their business models. But over time, I started to shift my focus a little bit towards the life sciences, because it became clear to me that while the healthcare delivery system moved very slowly in general, we were really facing a genuine tidal wave of innovation in life sciences, and that the products that were transforming what healthcare looked like were arriving in rapid succession and in ways that dramatically changed the standard of care. So I've been now for about 6 years focused mainly on what I would consider healthcare products. And I break down the entire industry a little bit differently than some folks may. I break it down basically between products and services. If you think about the $4 trillion a year that we as a society are spending on healthcare, roughly 80% of that spend is on services. And that's largely paying for labor-driven care delivery in, above all, the hospital environment. 20% is what we spend collectively on drugs, diagnostics, research tools, and medical devices, which increasingly do the heavy lifting for patients. And so,
Yeah, you have slides to show or no?
I do. I'm going to show a couple in just a minute.
Okay, and go ahead. Thanks.
Yeah. So our focus as a firm, TEN BioVentures, which we started about 2 years ago, is largely on medical products. And with that, I will pull up some slides here. And I'll just walk you through a little bit on our approach. So the big premise is we think very clearly that the life sciences revolution is upon us. We think it's the venture capital opportunity of the century. And unfortunately, for most of the large pools of capital, they recognize it's a very promising space, but it's a very difficult one to navigate. And so the role that a firm like ours plays is to basically enable large asset allocators to outsource their life sciences investing. I mentioned some of the companies I've been involved with, featured on the left here. I have a great partner in our firm named Tim Wright. Among other things, Tim ran all of global drug development at Novartis for many years. He's a physician scientist by training. And on the right here, you see some of Tim's biggest hits. 10 of his 20 approved drugs so far have been blockbusters, selling over $1 billion a year. And then we also work with some luminaries in the industry, some of whom you guys may recognize, folks like Jay Flatley, who built Illumina, and Bob Nelson, who's another investor, runs Arch Ventures. Again, key premise is that the past 50 years has been all about computing. The next 50, we think, are all about biology and the amazing powers that we're developing as a species to manipulate biology. And all of the computer people agree with this. If you look at where Google, Apple, Microsoft, Oracle, other large companies are now devoting resources, there is a significant focus on how the data sciences and the computing technologies can be brought to bear on healthcare, which is one of the great remaining untapped frontiers for digital disruption. Just to put it in a broader, way zoomed out historical perspective, we see this sort of what we call a life sciences revolution as the successor to the information revolution that many on this call have just lived through. I think what's really fascinating, despite the sort of broad agreement among thoughtful investors that this is a really interesting space, is that the entire market cap of all biopharma, that includes big pharma, is still smaller than just that of the 3 largest tech companies, which is remarkable, and obviously much smaller than the market cap of US equities writ large. And if you look at where the money is spent in the private markets, less than 10% of it is going into life sciences. So still, in our view, massive misallocation of capital to life sciences relative to the broader private market. If you look at where that money is going, a significant majority of it is going into later stage investing, whereas we invest at the very early stages. And so you can see here the smallest slice of the pie chart is where we play. It's a part of the market where less than $1 billion is being channeled today. And the last thing I'll mention just about our strategy is that we invest in these 5 areas: therapeutics, diagnostics, tools, and medical devices. So we are looking, as I would describe it, for moonshot companies. What does that mean? It means innovations that we don't view as incremental. And of course, there are lots of valuable products that are developed in healthcare that we would characterize as incremental: a slightly better screw or a slightly better stent. And these can create large financial outcomes, but we're really looking for those technologies that are going to fundamentally transform the standard of care. And so to give you a couple examples of companies in our portfolio that we think reflect this, one is Neuralink, which is another of Elon Musk's businesses. Neuralink is working on an implantable neural interface. So this is a medical device that will be implanted into the neocortex of patients who are severely speech or motor impaired and enable them to directly communicate or control computers with their thoughts. And that is now entering human clinical trials in the next 6 months. Another that we just did that I think is really compelling is a company called Conceivable Life Sciences. And what Conceivable is trying to do is fully roboticize and automate the embryology processes that are integral to in vitro fertilization. If you look at the rates of adoption for in vitro fertilization in the United States versus other industrialized economies like Spain or the UK, we have a very small percentage of women who are adopting IVF. And that's basically because it's very cost prohibitive. On average, women are spending $30,000 to $50,000 to get pregnant through IVF. And of course, that boxes most consumers out of that technology. So this company that we've just backed, Conceivable, is trying to roboticize and automate everything that's done in the embryology lab, which is really the most expensive part of the IVF process. We think by standardizing what's done there and by making it amenable to automation, we can reduce the cost of IVF by as much as 60%, and thereby open up this technology to an enormous number of women who would benefit from it. The last thing I'll share with you before opening up for questions, I said I would talk a little bit about how we pursue these moonshot ideas, but without being crazy, with trying to control risk. And I'm going to share some other slides here. Our approach depends upon being very rigorous with use of proceeds planning. I'm sorry, guys, I have COVID. Pardon my cough. So if you look at this slide, this is what we request from every company, which is a very clear use of proceeds, breaking down their development plan and the key milestones they'll reach. We're very big on requesting clear projections of when milestones will coincide with financing events. And it's this sort of careful planning that allows you to mitigate risk. And we can talk more about that when we look at some of the pitches today. So given my voice, I'm going to pause there, open it up for questions, and appreciate your attention.
Great. Thanks, DA. For those in the audience, if you have questions, please post them and we'll be glad to ask them. My first question is around the two most common areas I see startups work in is the oncology and the neurology space. And of course, there's plenty of money to be had in those spaces, so everyone's moving into it. What are you finding in those spaces that fit your thesis?
Yeah, look, I think, Hall, what we're finding is that, you know, as macro sectors, there is increasing interest in neurology, which particularly in drug development was viewed as a graveyard for a long time. With the approval of aducanumab and some of the other antibodies focused on Alzheimer's, and innovations also taking place around ALS and other neurological diseases, I think there's a renewed appetite from pharma, and that's driving both increased M&A activity by pharma and a greater appetite among VCs to invest in neurology. The bar has been raised on oncology, I would say. And so we do look at a lot of oncology therapeutics companies, but what people are now demanding in the private market is increasingly some clinical proof of concept before the big funds are willing to go in. And of course, running phase 2 or phase 3 trials can be very expensive. So we're seeing a lot less investor demand for preclinical oncology companies. And again, going back to sort of use of proceeds planning, and sorry, my voice broke, so I couldn't give as much detail there as I'd like to, is we are really sticklers for trying to see from companies a clear early clinical translational development plan that can get them to human proof of concept data on as little cash as possible, because that's really where we see the value inflection.
Great. My next question is, we see AI really impacting life science in many ways. Where do you think the initial wins are going to come for AI in the life science space?
That's a great question. Everyone today is sitting around the board table and saying, what's our AI strategy? And obviously the big pharmas are doing that as well. Many of the large pharmas have entered into a number of partnerships with private companies that have AI-enabled target discovery and early discovery molecule design tools. The technology is moving so rapidly that I think the question is going to be whether those companies can keep up with the open source algorithms. If you look at things like AlphaFold, which Google is constantly updating, it's a ball game that evolves every quarter, every 6 months. And that makes it a difficult space to invest in. So we keep our eye on a lot of what's going on in AI-enabled life sciences, but I would view it almost like the internet. It was difficult to be an internet investor writ large. It all came down to what are the applications that you believe are going to create value and what specific companies are going to be the winners. And when everybody knows that something is going to be a big market like the internet or like AI, there are real risks of investing too early. There are real risks of the early players pretty quickly losing ground to companies that haven't been started yet. And so if I had to guess, 15 or 20 years from now, what companies are going to be the biggest life science AI related businesses, they were either in some cases going to be companies that were started a long time ago, like big incumbents who will adopt this technology, or they may be companies that no one has started yet. And so I think the timing is really what's critical there.
Cool. So we have 2 questions from the audience. The first one is, have you looked into GABA and glycine inhibition neurotraining?
We have not specifically looked into quote unquote neurotraining. So I guess I need some more context on what's meant by that.
Okay. Next question is, what is the fund size of TEN Bio and typical check size you guys like to write?
Yeah, so we manage a little over 100 million. And we write checks in the $2 to $6 million range.
Great. And what's your diligence process there?
Well, look, we're looking at about 2,000 companies a year, and we run a relatively concentrated strategy where the goal is to invest in 4 to 6 companies each year. So we have a lot of filters that we put companies through. Obviously, we try to be respectful of entrepreneurs' time, kill deals early that we don't think are ultimately going to cross the finish line. And what we like to say is that everything sort of needs to line up. That means obviously the core technology we have to do a lot of diligence on. We have to believe the intellectual property is very strong and well protected. We have to believe the team is outstanding and knows what they're doing in terms of product development, translational work. We have to believe that the market is well positioned to finance a company, because writing $2 to $6 million checks, we can't carry these alone. And so we overlay each of these layers of analysis on top of each other. And it's only when we can check the box on every single one of them that we move forward with an investment.
Great. I think that's it for the questions for right now. For those in the audience, if you'd like to talk to DA, he'll be in his own breakout room at the end of this time. Please let us know if you have any interest to talk to him further with the poll that's on the screen now, and we'll be able to connect you there as well. With that, DA, thanks so much for taking time. And if you'd like to stay up here, we'll have our first presenter that you can talk with me about. This will be Sam Lang and Bill James of Windmill Cardiovascular.
Very good. Well, listen, thanks everybody for joining. My name is Sam Liang. I'm a visit and strategy advisor with Windmill Cardiovascular Systems. I'm here with Bill James and Jeff Goheen, and we're presenting on behalf of Dr. Richard Smalling, who is the CEO of Windmill, but he's also a full-time practicing cardiologist, and he's seeing patients today. Windmill is developing a transformational, what's called LVAD, left ventricular assist device for end-stage heart failure patients. When you look at the unmet need, today in the United States, there's over 5 million patients with heart failure. It's got a tremendous cost to the healthcare system. There's a subset of about 50,000 patients in end-stage heart failure that are seeking either heart transplants or a device called an LVAD, a left ventricular assist device. In the end, the LVAD, what it basically does is it takes blood from your left ventricle and it pumps it through and around into the aorta, so that you get blood, fresh oxygenated blood to the rest of your body. Now, unfortunately, if you see here on the bottom left-hand side, due to a lack of parts and deficiencies in LVAD technologies today, less than 9% of patients get an LVAD, which leaves over 40,000 patients with poor quality of life and outcomes. The mission for Windmill is to basically extend life and improve the quality of life for folks at end-stage heart disease. As we've talked about, patients either get a heart transplant or an LVAD, and this is a current conventional LVAD where the patient has to wear 2 large battery packs and basically have this implanted device. There is a tether that runs out to an outside controller. This entire system weighs about 6 to 8 pounds based upon the configuration that the patient has. The solution that Windmill has developed, and the reason why LVADs have limited adoption, is that the only product on the market today is called Abbott's HeartMate 3 technology, and it's based upon continuous flow pump. So think of a blender that's rotating around 3,000 to 5,000 RPMs to pull blood through the system. What ends up happening is this damages the red blood cells, and it results in about 1/3 of the patients having a high rate of adverse events, with over 90% of the patients having to go back for rehospitalization. The solution that Windmill has developed is called TORVAD, and it's basically an LVAD, a left ventricular assist device that simulates the human heart. The technology consists of 2 ceramic pistons that are enclosed in a titanium case that pumps in a very pulsatile fashion in synchrony with the patient's activity. AI algorithms sense the heart rate, pressure, and other factors to either speed up or slow down the pump. So if the patient is walking very fast, it speeds up. The patient's sitting down, it actually continues to slow down. It's very, very gentle, and it doesn't damage the blood. This is some recent testing that's been done against the only product on the market called the Abbott HeartMate 3. And what you basically see is the damage that is occurring in the red by the HeartMate 3 to the von Willebrand factor, which is the source of what happens that causes a lot of downside complications, GI bleeding, as well as stroke. The system itself is about 1.5 pounds, and it's about 1/3 of the size of the current HeartMate 3. In addition to that, because it is 1/3 of the size and it pumps in a pulsatile versus a continuous fashion, it draws and it requires about 1/3 less of the power supply. So that results in a very smaller system overall, and it also allows the ability for, in the future, a fully implantable system using a transcutaneous energy transfer technology, where the patient could have a fully implantable system and not have a controller extending outside of the patient body. All of these features, we believe, will reduce the adverse events as well as improve the patient and physician adoption for the system. Many patients today, even though they may qualify for an LVAD, the quality of life of wearing this and being tethered to the system, many patients will opt not to utilize the system. To demonstrate that the product is very, very gentle in its pumping, originally we had asked the engineers to put raisins through it to show that the raisins don't get damaged versus if you were to put them to the HeartMate 3, because of the continuous flow technology, it does chew them up. But the engineers came back and said, well, we can actually do something better than that. And essentially what you can see here is a fish. And this is the torvad that is pumping in a synchronous manner. And the fish comes through untethered. No fish was harmed in the use of this experiment, in the conduction of this experiment. The engineers have developed basically 3 generations from a design perspective. The first generation torvad, which has a drive line, so it does have, even though it does have an external pack controller, but it is about 1/3 of the size of the current product. They have actually filed IP and have a working prototype of a fully implantable system. And then they've also designed a smaller mini torvad, which is for pediatrics and women. What the company has achieved over the course with the funding to date, as I mentioned, 3 generations of products have been designed. Patents have been filed. They've completed over 50 animals and cadavers, as well as they presented and published the technology in many global meetings, as well as global journals. There's strong KOL support, key opinion leader support, and from an execution perspective, they've worked with 2 qualified vendors, which I'll talk through later, Micra and Valentium. The company has been incredibly capital efficient with most of their funding coming from non-dilutive sources such as the NIH grant. And last year, this is Dr. Smalling, they presented at ACC and won the ACC NIH Innovation Pitch Challenge. That was the top company rated by all of the participants. When you talk to any thought leader, the key takeaway from this slide is that all the thought leaders in the field today of LVAD technology has indicated that if this product did come to market, it would become their frontline therapy over the HeartMate 3. Abbott has done a very good job maximizing all elements, design elements of the HeartMate 3, but it still has a large amount of clinical issues from an outcome perspective. And they have really said, boy, if torvad were to hit the market, it would become my frontline therapy. When you look at the market today, it's currently reimbursed and paid out as a $1.1 billion global market today that's reimbursed. However, as I mentioned earlier in the opening slides, the total available market is actually $6.4 billion, and the low penetration rate again is due to lack of hearts from a transplant perspective, as well as poor adoption of the LVAD technology. With torvad launching, it would certainly take market share from HeartMate 3, but it would actually expand the VAD use due to its reduced adverse events and patient friendliness, and as well as an easier to implant overall, growing to a very large business. We would estimate that 1 to 2 years post launch of the product, it would be clearly a $1 billion revenue generating item. The company is currently raising $7 million to hire an experienced CEO with development expertise, as Dr. Smalling is still a practicing full-time cardiologist. It's to execute these agreements with Micra and Valentium, who are very qualified suppliers with LVAD experience. First, on the regulatory front, Micra, the primary advisor that we've engaged with is the former FDA approver who actually approved the current LVAD devices in the FDA. And the second contract is Valentium. They're a design and manufacturing house based in Houston, right down the road, as we're based in Austin, that has the experience and capabilities in implantable technologies. Overall, together with the Windmill team, they'll execute the work to finalize the pump controller peripheral designs and work with the FDA to develop the first in human EFS protocols. The last comment I'll just make is the exits in the LVAD market have all been in the billions of dollars, primarily to due to the unmet need and the market TAMs that I previously presented. And from an exit dynamic, there's a lot of strategics that would move into the LVAD market once this product becomes close to commercialization. The team here is got decades of experience, and we have engaged all of the thought leaders in the field of LVADs, or mechanical and circulatory support world. And with that, I want to thank everybody. Just a summary of the company itself, and I want to just thank everybody for their time and attention today. I'll open it up for any questions.
Great. DA, did you have an initial question you want to ask?
Yeah, I have a couple.
Sure.
Sam, what is the current status of Thoratec and Heartware? You mentioned those as two acquisitions. What's the status of the products that they were developing?
Yeah, so Thoratec is the company that was purchased by St. Jude, which was purchased by Abbott. So Thoratec is the actual, is the HeartMate 3 developer, and that's the only product on the market. The Heartware product was a product that was acquired. It was a company that actually, was a startup. They went public just prior to their U.S. FDA. As I recall, they went public raising funds for their FDA trial, and they were acquired by Medtronic for $1.1 billion. The Heartware device is also a continuous flow product, as we've talked about. It was a similar design to the HeartMate 3 done by Thoratec, and they had a large amount of complication rates. Basically, the number one rate that they had was a high degree of stroke rate. And in 2021, I believe, they decided to exit the market. They received a bunch of FDA warning letters. They had just a number of specific issues, and Medtronic decided to exit the market. So today, it's a one-player market where Abbott basically has has really the only play in town, and Medtronic has been just basically taking care of patients until they pass away or until they qualify for a heart transplant.
Can I ask one more question, Hall?
Yes, you can ask as many questions as you want. Okay,
great. Want to definitely open it up to others, but what is the projected cost for you to get through a first-in-human study?
Sure. Yeah. Let me just pull up a slide, and can everybody see this slide?
Yes, we can.
So this is the timeline that we've got for the overall slide. So DA, to answer your question, if you add these three chevrons up that are in this color, it's $20 million to get through the first-in-human trial. This first $7 million will take the company operationally to the end of 2025, and essentially the use of funds is to hire a CEO. Engage. We actually have all the contracts ready to go, but we've not signed them with Micra and Valentium. Once we execute that and bring on a CEO who's qualified and done this type of work on the implantable electronic side, we would then go through and execute and do the final design of the $7 million. There's another 9.5 for design verification and filing of the IDE. And then the actual trial for the first-in-human, it's about 5 to 10 patients. It's about $3.5 million to conduct that. And from an exit dynamic, basically after this $20 million is done, a couple things will happen. All the strategics have indicated, look, we just need to see some first-in-human data. And at that point in time, they can come in either to finance, again, and many of the VCs, they would also come in to finance. I work as an operating partner with a company called Revival Healthcare Capital that's based here in Austin, and we have a financial vehicle called the Build to Buy. So if a strategic is actually interested in a specific product in acquiring, we would actually provide the structured finance. And then similar to Heartware, there could be an IPO to raise funds for the U.S. pivotal, which would be about $45 million.
So Sam, we have a quick question before we finish. How long does the expected battery last?
Actually, let me, if I can, I'll bring in during Q&A Jeff Goheen, who's the actual engineer who helped design and develop that. But I believe it would last between 8 to 12 hours. But
And
I'll
how
let
does the
Jeff
battery
confirm that.
transfer take place to new
Sure.
batteries, specifically in the third phase product?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Third phase, is that referring to the test system? Would that
Well,
be...
just if you could just confirm, Jeff, how many hours the current battery?
Yeah, 8 to 12
last.
is about right. And it's, so there's different battery options and sizes that can be used too. A bigger battery could be used for longer life, smaller batteries for shorter, more mobile operation. Those are possible as well. But yeah, 8 to 12 is the current kind of target. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. We're out of time now, guys, but Jeff, if you could look in the chat box and if you want to give a more detailed response to the question there from Kevin, I think there's some interesting things we can discuss there as well. But thank you guys for pitching. Next up, we have with us James Blackledge of Capella.
Very good. All right. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you a bit about Capella Imaging and what we're doing here. This is actually kind of a nice follow-on to the previous presentation. So Capella Imaging, we're a small startup in St. Louis where we're developing a nuclear imaging agent that's focused on the diagnosis of thrombus associated with blood clots, and specifically with mechanical circulatory support devices like we just saw in the previous presentation. The people at Capella, we have a combined over 100 years of experience in drug development, ranging from research and development all the way to commercial launch. And our lead candidate that I'm talking about today is something called FiberSint, which is specific for the fibrin component of blood clots associated with both acute and chronic venous and arterial thrombus. So detection of thromboemboli it can be challenging in a number of instances because of the effects of having these metallic devices. And it's a growing problem. About 900,000 people annually will have some sort of venous thrombus event. The growing prevalence of heart failure in the U.S., it's responsible for about 20% of mortality. And this has resulted in an increasing population of people that have some sort of mechanical circulatory support devices, whether it's an LVAD, whether it's a prosthetic valve, whether it's an impeller. But all of these people share one thing in common. They've addressed one issue with the mechanical support, but now they are at an elevated risk for both venous and arterial thrombus. And many of these thromboemboli are difficult to diagnose, and the physicians that support these patients need to have better, more effective, and faster tools to assess the state of the mechanical support devices, but also to help them assess the effectiveness of the underlying anticoagulant therapy that is typically part of these devices. So this is some data we've acquired with FiberSint, and for us, this represents the most challenging scenario. So this is following up again on the previous talk. This is actually an image taken with a HeartMate 2 device. And what you see here is a patient came into the Washington University Medical School. They had the pump exchanged. We took that pump and put it in a mock loop, and using our diagnostic tool, we acquired the image you see here. And you can see the bright spot at the bottom curved neck of this. That's a thick layer of thrombus, a blood clot that has been plated out on the neck of this device. And so this patient was at risk of having a piece of that break off and causing a stroke, a debilitating or potentially fatal stroke. And so this is one of the primary, especially initial indications for FiberSint. And again, this represents the most challenging case of getting an image. This is a very high flow, very high shear environment. There's heavy levels of anticoagulant in the bloodstream of these patients, and this is a very challenging scenario to image thrombus, and we do very well, as you can see here. So, like I say, it's just the natural follow-on here. The LVAD market has a lot of potential. There's at least 25,000 patients annually that need some form that could benefit from a donor heart. And transplant is the gold standard. You know, if you could get a heart, then that's the best way to go. But there's only maybe 3,000, 3,500 donor hearts available annually. And that number is just not changing. It's been stagnant for many years. So these other people need a solution. And yet, you know, as we heard before, the number of LVADs, that market is not reaching its potential. And a lot of that is because of the complications and the difficulty in managing the post-implant care of these patients. They require significant doses of anticoagulant, which induces gastrointestinal bleeding. At least a third of these patients will be hospitalized for treatment of gastrointestinal bleeding at typically about $36,000 a stay. Probably 50% of those will have a second stay each year. And so if you had a better tool to adjust the titrate, you know, titrate the amount of anticoagulant and treat these patients better, let them have a better quality of life, we think you can access more of this market. And we think Fibricent is the tool for that. So it's a growing market, for better or for worse. You know, there's about 190,000 people each year that are implanted with some form of mechanical device. We see just the initial numbers here I'm talking about are only with LVADs and prosthetic valves that we think we can expand into pulmonary embolism, potentially DVT, things like that later. But we envision this with 2 images a year with, you know, $1,500 reimbursement. So that translates into a total addressable market of about $555 million. Again, pulmonary emboli is a much larger market. DVT is a much larger market. And, you know, there are aspects of both of those that are very difficult to diagnose, especially there's pulmonary hypertension that often has a thromboembolic aspect, and you know, published values for that, I mean, it can take 6 months to get a firm diagnosis. And so we think we can make a significant impact on those markets as well. And once you get your foot in the door, you know, we're talking about the same sort of time, the same cost, and you have the opportunity to become the diagnostic tool of first choice once you validate it. So we think there's quite a potential market here. So nuclear imaging agent, you know, most of my career has been in oncology. And so this has been kind of a pleasant surprise. The barrier to approval with nuclear imaging agents is very different. The amount of material that you dose is exquisitely small. So there's very little concern about toxicology. Most drugs fail transitioning from preclinical to clinical based on one of two things, either efficacy or toxicology. And efficacy, you know, it's the classic story. We've cured cancer in mice many times. Things that work in animal models don't necessarily work well in humans. In our case, one of our preclinical models is, you know, in the image I showed you before, we take these pumps out of humans. We go out west to the dairy industry here, and we get these male calves that the dairy industry has no use for. We get them cheap, and we can implant these pumps that have been removed from a human patient. We put them in a 70-kilogram calf, and we acquire our images. So this is really as close as you can get to clinical data in a preclinical model. So it's highly de-risked in that regard. Again, it's a nuclear imaging agent. The FDA actually requires only a single species of tox to allow you to move into human clinical trials. And so we've done that. We have a GLP tox study with a completely clean bill of health. So again, very low cash cost, low risk path to approval here. Our plan to get to market is to, you know, file an NDA, get approval, get a reimbursement code, and then we will partner with somebody else, you know, Curium, Cardinal Health, GE Healthcare. There are a number of people that we've actually already started having some preliminary conversations with, that we would use an existing sales force and distribution network to take this to the physicians that treat these patients. Competitors in this space, it varies quite a bit with indication. In the case of LVADs, there's absolutely nothing out there. It's completely unmet medical need. Most thrombus imaging involves some form of echocardiography. You can't do it with these metal pumps. So there's a completely unmet diagnostic need for LVADs. For prosthetic valves, our competition is the current standard of care, which is typically some form of echocardiography. Typically, it takes multiple forms of echocardiography to make a firm diagnosis. And then there are some subsets of it that are just completely insufficient with echocardiography. So we think we can make an impact there and again become the tool of first choice. For pulmonary embolism, once again, the competition is the current standard of care. It's a very similar story. You know, you get your foot in your door, you validate the tool with special unmet needs within this subset, and you become the tool of first choice. Our intellectual property position, this was developed in the lab of one of our co-founders, Dr. Greg Lanza. It came out of a conversation between him and Dr. Gregory Ewald, who is the chief of the Heart Transplant Center at the Washington University School of Medicine. And so this was, this product came about a couple of years ago based on the discussion of the need for this tool. They do a number of LVAD implants and they treat these patients, and they recognize that this is a problem and they need some better tool to address it. So Washington University has the intellectual property, they own the rights to it. We have the exclusive license to develop and market Fibricent. And we've made some structural improvements to the molecule during our development of a scalable GLP, GMP compliant process that we are filing to identify, to extend our patent pathway. But we have good intellectual property position. Again, this is fairly cheap in the drug market, in the drug development business. We're looking for $500,000 in the first quarter of next year, an $11 million valuation. That's based on the initial work we did. North Star Medical Radioisotopes invested $1 million in us that drove all of our preclinical development. And 500,000 will get us through an exploratory IND phase 1, phase 1B, where we treat a certain number of healthy volunteers, and then we're going to treat heart failure patients that have left atrial appendage blockage, and then we're going to treat LVAD patients as well. So at that point, we have clinical data. Some of our conversations we've had, for instance, with Cardinal Health and Abbott, make it clear that this is what they're looking for. They're interested, but they want to see clinical data. And comparable exits I've seen, I've got a few of them listed here, predict that this represents about a 19-fold return on the 500,000 investment. Phase 1 clinical trials gets us to our next major value inflection point, which is human clinical data. This is the Fibricent team, myself, Dr. Lanza, who is the PhD MD that developed this imaging agent, along with Grace Coy in his lab, and my partner, Dr. McGee. Again, we're very deep in drug development, and of course, Greg brings the cardiology aspect of it. These are our medical advisors, and I just can't say enough about these guys are world class. Barry Siegel, Sally Schwartz, they're household names in nuclear imaging. Both of them have seminar or awards and seminars named after them in the Society of Nuclear Medicine and Medical Imaging, in their honor. Sally has actually written the guidance documents that the FDA uses for exploratory INDs. Again, Dr. Ewald runs the heart transplant division at Washington University. Alan Zaharias pretty much has the same role in the heart valve department. And Dr. Schindler is an expert in both PET and SPECT imaging. I should say we are a SPECT imaging agent, and that's kind of important to point out because SPECT cameras are about a factor of 10 cheaper than PET cameras. They're much more common, and it's a lower energy isotope. So, nuclear imaging has become kind of popular. It's sort of sexy right now in the terms of theranostics, but a lot of them are using very high activity, very high energy, and very short half-life isotopes. They're difficult to work with. We use technetium-99, which is just a catalog item of Cardinal Healthcare. Every hospital in the U.S. has it. They do about 40,000 images a day in the U.S. with technetium. And that was my last slide. So
great. DA, what's your first question?
Yeah. Well, two quick questions. First, for the SPECT imaging, does this require any unique hardware that the hospitals don't have?
It does not. It's a typical SPECT CT camera. We are working with some instrument manufacturers to try to bring higher resolution SPECT cameras into play. You know, the nice image you saw there was with a rotating image. That is with a higher resolution SPECT camera. Typical images don't have that sort of gee whiz resolution, but when you put it over the CT scan, you know, you're able to identify where the clots are. But no, that's one of the attractive features is this does not require new technology in the case of the hospital itself.
Got it. My other question was around what the standard intervention would be for a patient with an LVAD in whom you are able to identify a clot in the pump itself.
Yeah, well, so typically, yeah, I'm going to put on my cardiologist hat here, which, you know, isn't the best hat I've got. Let me tell you. As a brief aside, it was nice to hear your story, DA. I kind of came to science in the same way. In a previous life, I was a musician for many years. But you know, patients come to the hospital because they're having problems. And right now, the markers like the Wildebrandt factor that was mentioned before, you know, these are not necessarily good diagnostic tools. They indicate something's up, but it doesn't say anything really specific about the clot load. And so, you know, we view the main feature for this as a maintenance tool. You know, you get imaged every 6 months, maybe higher if you're at especially high risk, but you want to avoid the situation where you look like that LVAD I showed, where you've got this big chunk of thrombus and you're really at risk. Because I would have to say that patient, I would imagine they would take this, if that image had been acquired in the patient, they would say, you know what, you're going nowhere. We got to get this pump out of you now. And you know, it's a pretty high risk surgery.
I guess
for, you know, these are fragile patients already.
Is the clinical decision that you would largely support around dosing anticoagulant?
Correct. I mean, right now you basically you treat these patients until they start bleeding out of their eyes, and then you titrate it back a little bit, and you watch for complications. You know, in this case, how we see this being used is you start on a pretty high dose, and 6 months later you come in, and if there are no signs of thrombus, you walk it down. And so you really would like to get that level of anticoagulant as low as you can to where you don't have gastrointestinal bleeding, but you're not developing thrombus. And right now there's no way to evaluate that.
Great. Thanks, guys. Great questions. Appreciate that, James. Let's move to our next presenter. Now we have CleanPAP. If we can bring in the slides, Raj.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So yeah, I'm representing CleanPAP for better, safer cleaning for people who use CPAP supplies and devices. And so wanted to share some information with you about CleanPAP, which is a novel device for an appliance for helping people save time and effort in keeping their CPAP supplies clean. This is a little bit about me. I'm Raj Kekar, and I have a lot of experience in sleep disorders, having treated sleep disorders for 20 plus years. I did my training in sleep fellowship in Stanford for my sleep fellowship training there, which was a wonderful experience. And I've also been the president and medical director of Dallas Sleep, which is the sleep clinics here in the Dallas area, Dallas, Texas. So this is something that I have a lot of experience with, and I've kind of picked up on problems and pain points that patients experience over the years. One of these opportunities is CleanPAP. People who use CPAP for treating sleep apnea really need help when it comes to cleaning their mask and device and different compartments clean, because they are concerned about the effects of using CPAP and not cleaning it regularly. Manufacturers, just so you know, CPAP manufacturers typically recommend cleaning the CPAP parts and supplies on a daily basis. unfortunately, most people don't have that much time or motivation to do hand cleaning, hand washing on a daily basis. A little bit about the market. Half of adults in the US are expected to have obesity by the end of this decade, which is a 70% increase. There's a much higher increase of people experiencing sleep problems after COVID. Sleep apnea itself, I mentioned that it's a very common problem in the United States and around the world. In the US alone, 70 million people are affected by sleep apnea or obstructive sleep apnea, which is a common type. Majority of these cases actually remain undiagnosed. So CPAP is the most effective treatment for sleep apnea treatment, and it essentially involves using a mask with a hose that connects to the CPAP device, which is basically blowing filtered air to help maintain the airway to keep that open for breathing during the night. Sleep apnea is associated with a lot of other health problems, including cardiovascular disease, cognitive impairment, and diabetes, and weight gain. There is a huge market available to us. The CEO of ResMed, which is one of the major manufacturers of CPAP devices, says that the cases are rising, and there's going to continue to be more and more people diagnosed with sleep apnea worldwide. There's probably, he said, around 1 billion people. So there's a huge market potential. So one of the, as I mentioned, alluded to earlier, was there's a problem with cleaning the CPAP equipment, because that does require regular cleaning, to not only keep it clean, but also to get a good fit with the mask. And we want to help people to do that, because otherwise there are concerns about contamination from bacteria, viruses, mold, and those types of things. So we're not the first product. CleanPAP is not the brand new market innovator. We're just taking advantage of what we've seen has worked and hasn't worked on the market. So the original, trailblazer in this field was SoClean. That's the main competitor. They've been around for over 10 years. And they are still the market leader. They established this market back in 2012. Their device sells for $349. It's not covered by insurance, so that's out of pocket. And it utilizes ozone to disinfect the equipment. They were very successful. I had people coming in daily, from the beginning, asking me about this device. So their marketing effort was fantastic, and that's what we hope to emulate. Another device is React Health's Lumen CPAP cleaner, which is a little different, and it uses UV light to try to disinfect the parts. So again, you're just putting the parts into it to try to disinfect them. With the SoClean, it actually, you put your mask inside, and it blows the ozone air through the mask, through the tube, into your CPAP device. After a couple of years, people started noticing with SoClean that there may be some downside to it. And I had concerns from the very beginning, because my background is in the medical field. I knew that ozone is not really the safest thing to use when you're talking about the respiratory system, or something that you're cleaning or that you could inhale. So I always had reservations from the beginning, and I never really recommended or endorsed it. However, I had hundreds and hundreds of patients who bought it and were using it at home, and we're talking all ages of adults. So we found over time that the ozone air would create strange smells. It caused some discoloration of the mask, and it never received FDA approval. And just in the last few years, couple of years, there's been huge recalls since 2021 of millions of CPAP devices, specifically Philips. Philips Respironics had to recall 4 million CPAP devices because of damage to their devices, which they blamed on ozone cleaners like SoClean. And another major manufacturer, ResMed, voided their manufacturer's warranty if anybody uses a SoClean or ozone cleaner with their devices as of 2020. So that came the idea of CleanPAP. So we wanted to create a product which can solve this problem for people, to keep their products clean and neat without labor-intensive, time-consuming effort, and without any concerns of ozone or other type of toxic exposure. So this is the CleanPAP. And it's a very simple appliance which can be used in the home, and it can be placed next to a sink, whether it's in the nightstand, whether it's in the bathroom or in the kitchen by the sink. And it's essentially automated. So they would simply put their parts into the device, and it's going to clean them with mild soap and water, the old-fashioned way. And so there's no hurry, no worries, no headaches, no concerns. And we have a patent on the design, and so that is our IP. We have the parts that go with it, which the upper chamber opens to place the parts inside. The lower chamber has a water container there to place water to use for the cleaning cycle. And this is kind of a little bit further breakdown into what it looks like, the different parts and components to it. But it's essentially, we try to keep it very simple. And again, here you can see there's an appliance, a CleanPAP, sitting right next to the sink in the bathroom. So it's really not meant to take too much space, but also to serve a purpose of keeping things neat and clean for people. And here's a picture in the kitchen. It basically will provide people with the high satisfaction, peace of mind, and they don't have to have, again, any concerns and worries about it. We actually got some feedback on our first prototype from 100 patients from our medical practice, and we used that feedback to make changes and make modifications to our first prototype. And so this is our team here. It's myself, and then our CFO is John Autry, and then we have our engineering team we're working with at Tangent Engineering, and we have other partners who are helping us along the way. We're looking for investors to help us to get this project started from actually finished from a design standpoint. We're near the end, but we want to fine-tune the design for manufacturing, and then take it for manufacturing and market introduction. We're seeking $2 million in exchange for some equity, and again, the funds are going to be used to complete engineering, design and engineering, and manufacturing, and then for commercial distribution, marketing, and sales. So with your help, we can bring CleanPAP to market and revolutionize CPAP cleaning forever.
Great. Thanks, Raj. DA,
Yeah.
what's your first question?
Yeah, thanks, Raj. What is wrong with the Lumen device?
That's a good question. So essentially, the Lumen device is using ultraviolet light. So you can put the mask and other parts inside of it, and it will essentially disinfect using UV light. But unfortunately, the UV light doesn't get everywhere, especially when you're talking about inside the tubing or even inside the water chamber, which holds the water. So it may disinfect to some extent, but the downside is, and especially for the mask, it's not really getting rid of the oils from the skin that collect on that mask night after night after night. Neither of these other products have ever addressed that problem. And the CleanPAP will actually wash the mask, remove some of those oils from the mask, so you really maintain the best fit possible.
Got it. And do you have any concern about, Inspire or some of these other implantable solutions? I know that's a cumbersome surgery, but we've seen a company called Invicta that's got a much less invasive device that's being developed, and I imagine there will be others. Do you think, over the next 10 or 20 years, CPAP stands to remain the predominant solution, or do you think any of these other more fancy solutions are going to?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and of course, we can never, predict the future of technology. But from my experience so far with the Inspire and those types of treatments, is that they may be an adjunct or an additional option for a small segment of the population, but they're not going to help to address this problem for the large majority of patients with sleep apnea. Based on my experience so far, the last couple of years with Inspire, which for those of you not familiar, it's a nerve stimulator that stimulates the tongue to keep it stiff while you're sleeping at night. The tongue is usually part of the problem, but it's not the entire problem in causing sleep apnea. And so I found that it helps in some mild to moderate cases, but for people who are more severe, they don't get nearly as good as results as they do with CPAP treatment. And so most of our patients prefer to stick to CPAP since they know that works for them and they're getting results with it.
Hall, I can keep going, or I don't know if you or others.
You have a little bit more time. Go ahead and ask another question.
Yeah, great. can you walk us through how you would envision this being paid for once commercial?
Yeah, so essentially what our competitors have done is they've essentially gone direct to consumer. So they had a whole lot of success with SoClean going direct to consumer, just with the direct advertising, whether it's online, magazine, and even TV advertising. And so they were very successful in that. And I had patients coming and asking me about it, many of them after they've already bought it. So that was pretty interesting. So they really did a great job. And again, their price point was initially $399 a unit. They just dropped it by $50 a few years ago. But it started off at $399, and believe me, it was selling without a problem at that price point. And so yeah, I feel like there's an opportunity there to go direct to consumer. I don't think we really have to be too concerned about insurance. Obviously, if we can get insurance approval at some point, that may be something we want to do, but I don't think that should slow us down or hinder our approach.
And have you engaged at all with the CPAP manufacturers about potentially collaborating here?
I did a few years back. I did try to approach them when I had a first prototype and such, and or for licensing. I threw that idea out there. Unfortunately, I didn't really get a lot of interest from them. I think their focus is more on manufacturing devices and manufacturing replacement parts. So they're into selling the parts and the supplies for the CPAP directly. I just didn't get a lot of interest from them regarding a cleaning product. So I think it would be helpful, but that wasn't something that was appealing to them at that time.
Is there, I mean, sort of just following on that, is there a significant enough incidence of complications arising from the lack of disinfection that it's something the regulators are paying attention to, or that those companies might at this point see a sort of a greater need to care about?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think that the FDA is aware of this problem, and that there have been these large recalls which have been affecting not only the manufacturers of CPAP devices, but people who are actually injured or affected by these recalled devices. And so there is concern that that could be related to ozone cleaners. And so again, none of them have been approved by the FDA, and they may look further into that as time goes forward. However, we want to create something and provide something on the market that we can overcome these challenges and essentially avoid those kinds of concerns for our patient population.
Got it. One last question. I mean, what you've invented here is a little dishwasher, basically.
Yeah,
is there
right.
any reason you couldn't put these components in a traditional dishwasher on a cold cycle?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So yeah, we basically created a mini dishwasher for CPAP, and that was the idea behind it. The reason we can't just throw them in a dishwasher is because these parts have to stay within certain temperature and pressure guidelines, and those are stated by the manufacturers of the specific parts for the masks, the tubing, and all. So they do not recommend dishwashing at any temperature level because of this concerns about pressure and temperature. So again, that was one of the points we kept in mind when we created a CleanPAP, that we're going to make sure our device is within those constraints for pressure and temperature, so we don't do any damage to the equipment.
Great. Thanks, guys. We're out of time. Great questions, DA. Thanks for great presentation, Raj. Appreciate that. With that, we'll go ahead and move to our final presenter today, James Watkins of Asante Bio. James, if you could go ahead and join us on the stage and launch your slides.
Yeah, actually, Michael will be presenting.
Okay.
There we go.
We do see the slides now, Michael.
Okay,
if they're
great.
in presentation mode, go ahead and kick off.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'm Dr. Michael Francis, CEO of Asante Bio. We are a joint preservation company and excited to talk to you all about our reinforcer technology. It's an arthroscopic suture augment targeting initially rotator cuff repair, but it is a very big platform. We've been vetted through NIH and other federal agencies. And who is this guy? The foundation. So I'm an experienced CXO. I've founded multiple companies with successful exits. I'm also an inventor. I have deep commercial R&D. I've been awarded 86 patents. Most of those are generating revenue in medical devices and biologics. I've also published many dozens of papers in the field of orthopedics. What else? So I'm also a co-founder and inventor at Embody, which recently exited earlier this year to Zimmer Biomet for a $275 million total deal. So the issue here we are addressing is rotator cuff repair surgery, where about 45% of surgeries will fail, typically within the first 3 to 6 months after surgery. And why so many failures? The reason is fairly simple, that recent surgeon surveys have shown that the suture itself, while incredibly strong, outlasts the tendon. And in fact, it cuts through the tendon. If you zoom in on a suture, it's braided, and that braid has a bit of a tooth-like pattern on the suture, which can cut and tear through the tendon. Very common in even young and old patients. And it happens so often, the surgeons have a name for it. They call it cheese wiring. And that's generally what they're seeing. So what you see in a rotator cuff tear, the cartoon on the left, you have a typical, what's called a double row suture repair, where the suture is placed over top of the tendon to hold it all together after the top of your cuff has been torn. But the illustration here shows where very commonly the suture pulls through and you have a loose flap again. You lose mobility, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. And reoperation can typically cost about 6 times more, which is pushing up into the 40 to 80,000 plus range, and occasionally leads to a arthroplasty, a total joint replacement. And what we have developed is a suture reinforcer with a Viper Lock technology. The fangs look very imposing, but they're only 3 millimeters long. This is a very small thing that goes into this suture. As you can see here in the illustration, it slides down into place arthroscopically through a very tiny, less than 1 centimeter hole incision placed in the skin, passes down and share and distributes the load. It does it very quickly and very effectively. So my director of biomedical engineering is a machine learning and AI specialist, and working with him and also real world samples that we've made in the lab, we've been able to show that we can reduce the force tremendously around where the suture passes through. So this is not very different than what you'd have if you look at the shoelace in your Chuck Taylor shoes or your sailboat sail. They all have grommets of sorts going through it. So what we've done here is take a human tendon and perform a standard suture repair on the left, where we see the stress and the strain is really quite high. Anything above 4.5 or so megapascals typically rips and fails. As you see here, that's what we get in the simulation is what the surgeons see in real life. Now, if we put our little augment in here, the reinforcer in place, it shares the forces, shares the loads, and helps distribute the forces. And the stress barely goes above about 0.8 megapascal, so very low, about a 1/10 reduction in the force in this area. And it's not just in simulations. We've done this in real life. We've done cadaver labs, the largest, most prestigious lab in the country with some of the best surgeons in the world putting this in place. And the best part is it works within the existing surgical workflows. So for very busy orthopedic surgeons, time is trauma and time is certainly money. So the current technologies they have are a lot of fiddle factor. This is designed to go in about 60 seconds, and it goes in easily into place into the surgical site. And as we do mechanical testing of the actual augments we've made with our commercial scale developer, we've been able to get about a 300% or more increase in the load carrying capacity with the augment on the suture into actual tendon, as we see here. So it works not just theoretically, but in practice. And this is a big deal because this is a very big, very growing space. Sports medicine is the largest growing segment in medical devices. And there's been some very big recent exits here, 200 million plus over the last 5-6 years or so. One of which was my last companies, which have made patches that are theoretically intended to grow new tendon-like tissue, which takes about anywhere from 9 to 18 months to turn this patch into new tissue. However, failures often occur earlier, much earlier. About 45% of failures, perhaps more even, up to 90% in some clinical studies will fail in the first 3 months. So nothing's addressing that early, fragile time right after surgery. So we've done a very large surgeon survey here. We've been part of an NSF I-Corps program. We've talked to the many surgeons in our networks. And what we are seeing is that surgeons are generally seeing the suture tendon failure in about 86% of cases. Now, growing new tendon tissue has been great for some cases, but a lot of the cases are not being well served. Those patches are also incredibly expensive. Our augments are about 1/5 of the price. So surgeons ultimately have been looking for a better solution. There are only thus far about 10% of sports medicine surgeons who have adopted the patches. And this again is despite very large exits, 200 million plus. They are generating quite a lot of revenue, quite a lot of interest. And foundationally, this is tied to us having almost 500,000 surgeries each year for rotator cuff repair. So really just massive clinical need. So we have a solution. We've got a very big problem, and we've also built a great team to address this. I've got a background in devices and therapeutics. I've been funded generously by the Department of Defense, DARPA, NIH, the Army, the Air Force over the last few years. Mr. James Watkins is our Chief Commercial Officer. He's a former Microsoft exec, and he is an expert in going to market. Lots of licensing deals under his belt and a lot of revenue generated exceeding $1 billion. Dr. John Dickens is our CSO. He is a former director of orthopedics at Walter Reed, a national military medical hospital. And he's also a professor of orthopedic surgery at Duke. And Dave McGurl leads our regulatory. He's got 20 years of experience. He worked inside of FDA on orthopedics. He's got over 100 devices cleared. So we've been working at this for the last couple of years, and this technology is heavily de-risked. We have a very clear path from our regulatory leads. We have a manufacturing partner who's made prototypes, and we've been able to show we can make these at scale with our manufacturing technology. We have in silico and cadaver testing. We have a PCT and US patents, and also a legal opinion that we are free and clear in the space. And again, our equity is leveraging our grant funding that's helping us get this far with minimal dilution, although we are looking to accelerate at this point, and this is why we're raising capital to get to market in 9 months upon our 510(k) clearance. So the market opportunity here is quite large. Again, going back to the recent comps to justify these, and also the sheer case volume, the total available market here, US only 1.8 billion, global pushes 4 billion plus, and that leaves us with a SAM of about 867 million and the SOMs at about a 120. That's with a 95% margin. And given the nature of this technology, it's very economical to make. It does not cost very much at all to make these augments. It's injection molded of a biopolymer, and the target strike price for the kit is about $1,000. So there's very, very large margins and a lot of profitability baked into this, even while we are saving the healthcare system tremendously over the competing products. Competing products will sell for anywhere from $8,000 to $13,000. So we're able to disrupt this market and still bring in tremendous value to us and our shareholders. And we've been validating this with our surgeons, our friends within the NIH, our surgical centers, anyone who will look at this model, helping us figure out best ways to extract value. There's no royalties here, so all this is going to come into Asante Bio, into the company, no universities. This is all technology we have invented in-house. And as you can see here, we have very strong positive cash flow. We anticipate no secondary raise. We will, of course, reevaluate as needed, although we can see here pretty healthy ramp ups in profitability early on coming into 2026. So what we have here is opportunities for future business with strong dividends or the exit to strategic partners, some of which we've already been in early discussions with. And there's a lot of interest in the field about this type of approach over patches. So as far as differentiation goes, with the competitors we have in orthopedics, there are many, very, very many, but these are also potential merger and acquisition partners, of course. They're listed at the bottom. And what we have specifically, point over point, comparing to just a surgical knot, which is one way you can replicate this approach. However, it's inconsistent. It's very hard to do. It takes a very long time to make these knots, which again, time is trauma and money. So this gives us an advantage of making it very easy, very simple, very fast. You only get one shot with an arthroscopic knot. Unfortunately, we get many shots with this device, and it's not variable like a surgical knot. So we have a lot of advantages. It's very economical. It's very reproducible. And again, over the bioinductive scaffolds, the patch products, which are a completely different approach in technology, they have no strength. They have no ability to support the shoulder initially after surgery, that critical healing time. And they all use these really poor stapling approaches, which the leading technology, Regeniten, has massive issues with staples popping out, causing pain, discomfort. They're hard to place and generally very problematic. We don't use any such technology. So again, wrapping up here, we've got about $1 million into the company thus far, primarily with non-dilutive grants, my own investments as well. We've been funded through NSF, DoD, and the NIH primarily for this technology. And we've got about 1.9 million forward on this NIH grant application for the phase 2 SIBR. I've won about 25 million myself over the past 8 years. So very familiar with the process and the prospects of this funding and executing on it, of course, as I had done in the past. And we're looking at a $4 million equity round. This is going to be our Series A round. And this is going to be price preferred. We've got a $20 million pre with usual terms. And this financing, this funding is going to drive product development. It'll be 510K process, package, and all the testing required to get through the 510K and get onto the market within 9 months for that submission. It'll drive marketing, production, and logistics, the go-to-market activities, product expansion. And this will lead, this $4 million brings us to the product launch and revenue, which again scales generously after we get to market through our distributors and other partners. So we're ready to commercialize within 9 months. This is going to be a Class 2 medical device. The research is complete. The product has been validated. We have an FTO opinion. Patent work is done. The regulatory path is clear, and we have inventory build on our horizon. So quick summary to recap. We've got 2 years in on development, strongly differentiated, nothing like this in the market to be delivered on a suture and improve outcomes for rotator cuff repair. Prospectively, other indications, hernia, Achilles tendon, other places I didn't get into. We're staying laser focused on cuff at this point, but we have a big market expansion opportunity. We have deep clinical and industrial expertise. We have a host of other surgeons and our KOLs who have been guiding and directing us over the past couple of years. And what we're bringing surgeons is value in simplicity and an effective soft tissue repair. So our initial product targets an $867 million opportunity. That's again for shoulder only. It grows tremendously as we move into other markets outside of sports medicine. And we're looking at $4 million to get through FDA and launch into our 3. So we have already found our 3 target orthopedic surgical groups. Within those groups, there's 337 doctors, which we're already building relationships with. And these are our 5-year projected financials. I'm not going to stick here. I'm happy to go back to it and we can talk through it. But I'll wrap up with saying it's time to prevent the needless, costly, and painful soft tissue tears. And we're here to give sports med docs the elegant and effective tech they want and need. It's surgeon developed technology. We're happy to be the conduit working with them to get this out to market. So thank you for your time.
Great. DA, what's your question?
Yeah, what's your predicate for the 510K?
Yeah, great question. So there has been a couple of shots on this goal over the past. One is out of Arthrex. They have a button, and there's other buttons that have been developed that have been used to hold the such as an ACL repair and other repairs together out of J&J, ConMed. A few others have analogous devices. So we're leveraging their existing predicates, which have very broad IFUs, which cover what we're looking at here for rotator cuff repair.
And have any of those products been super successful in those other indications?
Yes. So the indications for ACL, the buttons that are used are ubiquitous. They're used in every case. They're used widely. I would probably imagine, I don't want to say every case, but nearly every case gets one of these buttons. They've been developed as a flat technology that's designed to merely spread the load around. If you imagine like a shirt button with a suture passing up and down through it, that is the extent of that technology. Ours takes their technology and adds on very novel layers. One is we have a belay device, which is why there's a rock climber here showing. So we have a belay locking mechanism, which locks the suture to the reinforcer augment, which the competing tech does not have as part of our IP. The second are those fangs that gently bite into the tissue and hold. Snakes also don't tear tissue, they bite and hold really well. So we've used biomimicry to mimic a Viper's tooth pattern to hold the augments in place and share and distribute the load. So we have differentiation there, which is why their technology has likely not made it into the cuff repair space yet. They haven't added those necessary additional elements to make the biomechanics successful.
Really excited to see you next time. We do these once a month at the first Wednesday of each month. And then we have a second pitch session, which is the third Wednesday of each month. So we're really looking forward to seeing you all at those, and definitely check out our Eventbrite to see more events we're doing.